you very much. Over here, please. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Can you take one?
Permanent Representative of Israel to the United Nations, Ambassador Danon, State Department Envoy to Combat Anti-Semitism, Mr. Elan Carr, Mr. Idan, ambassadors and friends, good afternoon and welcome. On behalf of Israel's permanent mission to the United Nations, on behalf of JIMENA, the American Sephardi Federation, Justice for Jews from Arab States, the World Jewish Congress, and the Conference of Presidents, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today to take note of a very special day, Israel's official day to commemorate the Jewish refugees from North Africa and the Middle East. My name is Daniel Flesch. I am the spokesperson and senior advisor for the Israeli mission. I'll be your moderator this afternoon. Allow me to first welcome our first speaker today, Nathaniel Malka, JIMENA board member, to open with his remarks right here. Thank you.
Good afternoon to those assembled here in New York, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those streaming or watching on delay. My name is Nathaniel Malka, and I'm a lay leader of JIMENA, Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you here today as we honor Israel's 5th anniversary to commemorate the nearly 1 million Jewish refugees who were expelled or fled anti-Semitic persecution in countries throughout the Middle East and North Africa. As the son of an Iraqi Jew, born in Baghdad just a month after the Farhud, and as the grandson of a Baghdadi Jewish conscript of the Ottoman army, I'm here as the delegate of my own Baghdadi Jewish ancestors to represent their history, our history. We are honored to join together in this important occasion at the United Nations, and I feel particularly honored to be able to introduce today's speakers. Israel's permanent representative to the United Nations, His Excellency Danon. U.S. Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism, Elan Carr. And human rights activist and former Miss Iraq, Sarah Idan. This is not JIMENA's first time welcoming Elan Carr and Sarah Idan to the stage during a Mizrahi commemoration ceremony, as JIMENA has hosted both speakers for commemoration events in the past. I look forward to hearing your words. I would like to thank our co-sponsors for today's program, the AA Society, the American Sephardi Federation, the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Justice for Jews from Arab Countries, and the World Jewish Congress. I would also like to thank our hosts, Israel's permanent mission to the United Nations, for inviting us to honor Jewish refugees in this historic space. We are grateful to be in the presence of diplomats from around the world, and JIMENA would like to thank the permanent missions from Australia, Austria, Canada, Costa Rica, Cyprus, Czechia, the Gambia, Hungary, Kiribati, Latvia, Malawi, Nauru, Panama, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, Poland, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Republic of North Macedonia, Slovenia, and Togo for sending their diplomats to participate today. Please join me in giving a special round of applause to welcome these dignitaries. I would like to honor the presence of two Mizrahi Jewish leaders who have committed decades towards advocating for the recognition and rights of Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa. Without their steadfast international leadership, vision, and persistence, we likely would not be sitting in this room today. They continue to guide JIMENA in our efforts to pursue recognition and justice for Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews. Please join me in thanking President of Justice for Jews from Arab countries, Rabbi Eli Abadi, and Iraqi Jewish advocate and leader Carol Basri. Our Middle Eastern and North African Jewish heritage and history will live on because of dedicated champions like you. Thank you. Finally, I would like to thank important allies who have stood shoulder to shoulder with JIMENA and other Mizrahi and Sephardic communities in our efforts to protect the rights and heritage of Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa. Please join me in thanking Director of Legislative Affairs at B'nai B'rith International, Eric Fussfield, Executive Director of World Jewish Congress, Betty Ehrenberg, Executive Vice President of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Malcolm Honlein, and President of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Arthur Stark. Shalom Aleichem, peace be upon you. Shalom lekulam, peace to all. The Jewish people have uttered yearnings for peace with these phrases for more than 3,000 years. In Babylon, near today's Baghdad, you may have heard these words since Jews first arrived more than 2,500 years ago. Similarly, you may have heard them from my grandfather as he came of age 100 years ago when Baghdad was nearly 50% Jewish. In some ways, it seems like a very long time ago indeed. As his service in the Ottoman army in the Great War concluded in 1918, just before the founding of the League of Nations, he would not have foreseen just how dramatically his community's tolerated dhimmi status would deteriorate over the coming decades. At the time of the founding of these United Nations in 1945, my family had just fled Baghdad, first for Jerusalem and soon after to Tel Aviv. While he might have imagined the important role this body would come to have, he surely would not have imagined he would have a grandson to grow up in a place called Florida, study mathematics at a school named Harvard, and then one day address this body by relating his own story. As perhaps a trailer of a much longer argument, please momentarily indulge my thinking in mathematical terms with this syllogistic inference. Rabbi Abadi has in the past said, without remembrance, there cannot be truth. Without truth, there cannot be justice. Without justice, there cannot be reconciliation. Without reconciliation, there cannot be peace. We are here today for remembrance, that first step, that first principle in that syllogism. We recall the history of my ancestors and the rest of the nearly 1 million Jews who left North African and Middle Eastern lands under duress in the last century. The responsibility to remember is a theorem which occasionally gets confused with corollaries. Yet we must remember. Intellectual honesty demands it, as does the value of honoring our ancestors. Let me once again wish you peace and wish you all strength in your work toward reconciliation, the path that we pave on the way to peace, enabled by the justice required for it, determined with truth that is timeless, and built over the remembrance we undertake today and increasingly all the other days of the year. Peace remains our eternal aspiration, and it will not come without these other principles first. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathaniel, for your remarks. I would now like to introduce Ambassador Danon. Ambassador Danon is Israel's 17th permanent representative to the United Nations. In this role, he has served as Vice President of the General Assembly, as well as Chairman of the UN Legal Committee. That was, in fact, the very first time that an Israeli held such a position, to chair a permanent committee of the United Nations. Prior to assuming his current position, Ambassador Danon held senior positions in Israel's cabinet and Knesset, including Minister of Science and Technology, including Deputy Minister of Defense, Deputy Speaker of the Knesset, and member of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Ambassador Danon, as many of you know, is a very proud Zionist and champion of the Jewish people. And he continues here in the United Nations to make a lasting impact as Israel's representative on the world stage. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Danny Danon.
Shalom, welcome, salam alaikum, distinguished ambassadors, distinguished friends. Yesterday we had a different event in the General Assembly speaking about the Palestinian refugees. Actually, we speak a lot about the Palestinian refugees here in this building, but today we're going to speak about the forgotten Jewish refugees. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon to honor the Jewish refugees who were forced out of Arab countries and Iran. Holding this event here at the UN raises awareness of a fact that was overlooked in these halls. There were two populations that became refugees as a result of Israel's war of independence. I would like to start by welcoming my dear friend, Mr. Elan Carr. Thank you for coming today, Idan. Thank you for the important work you do all around the world. I would like also to welcome Sarah Idan and thank her for being here today. Thank you, Sarah. Mr. Netanel Malka, I was worried that there will be an Iraqi majority because with you, Sarah and Elan, so I'm Egyptian, so we are trying to balance. I know we have a lot of people from many Arab countries here with us. I will not name all of them, but we will speak about them. I want to thank my dear friend, Rabbi Abadi. You were one of the first ones to bring this issue to the awareness of the Jewish community, and here in New York and in the world stage. Thank you very much. I want to thank, I would like to thank JIMENA, World Jewish Congress, and the rest of our co-hosts for helping us make this event possible. Shortly after the establishment of the State of Israel, my late father, Joseph Danon, moved from Alexandria, Egypt, to Israel. He was one of almost 850,000 Jews who left immediately. He told me the story that they never had time to pack, to say goodbye to their friends, to their teachers. They left immediately. They were expelled. They were fled from their homes in those years. In 1948, there were around 1 million Jews living in Arab countries and Iran. Today, there are only a few tens of thousands left. The choice to commemorate the National Day of Remembering Jewish Refugees forced out of Arab countries and Iran, actually on the 30th of November, is no coincidence. Because on the 29th of November, that's when the important resolution passed here in the United Nations, where this institution recognized the importance of forming a Jewish state in Israel. Right after that historical moment that took place not too far away from here, 72 years ago in Flushing Meadow, Queens, that's when the problem started all around the Middle East. Pogroms, violence, incitement, that was the reason so many people had to leave their homes. The hate, the anti-Semitism expressed by governments, by countries, had nothing to do with borders, settlements. There was no settlements back then, but there was anti-Semitism all over. The very idea of a Jewish state in Israel was enough to reignite the simmering flame of anti-Semitism and have countries turn on their own loyal citizens. Many of those who experienced the exodus and expulsion were forced to leave behind their belongings, their houses, properties, everything. But more importantly, They left their memories and traditions. There have been Jewish communities in Arab countries for over 2,500 years. Think about that. You are very proud of your American history, and you should be. But 2,500 years of tradition, of culture. Over time, each of these communities developed its own unique heritage and culture. While differing in some of their traditions, these communities are all rooted in the same Jewish values which they celebrate and highlight in every aspect of their lives. Although the Jewish refugees did not forget their heritage or how they were forced out of their homes, unfortunately, the international community did. Every time the UN talks about the refugees of Israel's war of independence, they speak only about the Palestinian refugees. The fact is that there were two populations of refugees, and we must not allow that fact to be forgotten. Not only because we must honor those who lived through it, but because we must learn from it. Today, anti-Semitism is all over. And we know that it raised its ugly head in the 1940s, and we see it today in 2019. Denying the rights of Jewish refugees and attempting to erase them from the narrative is an anti-Semitic historic injustice. The State of Israel works to ratify this injustice by highlighting the culture and traditions of the Jewish refugees forced out of Arab countries, and by documenting all property that was left behind by them. We are also fighting this injustice here at this building at the UN. Yesterday, I announced in the General Assembly that I am going to propose a resolution that will reaffirm the Jewish refugees' place in history and assure that their rights are recognized. We're going to submit this resolution. Thank you. We're going to submit this resolution to the General Assembly, and I can see no legitimate reason for any member state to oppose the resolution. Ladies and gentlemen, commemorating this day reminds us of how far we have come in bringing the Sephardic and Mizrahi traditions to their rightful place. But it also reminds us that we must work to correct the historic injustice that has left the Jewish refugees out of the narrative of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We always say, Kol Israel arevim ze lazeh. All Jews are responsible for one another. We are responsible for each other's safety. We are responsible for each other's well-being. And we are responsible that all of our traditions, cultures, and histories are remembered. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Danon. And one quick note, Elie Wiesel once famously said, if you listen to a witness, then you become a witness. An event like here, and Ambassador Danon's comments yesterday before the General Assembly talking about this resolution we're going to be bringing forth will make everyone here a witness and everyone in the GA a witness as well. We'll not be able to ignore this issue. Our next speaker here is Special Envoy Elan Carr. Before assuming the role of the U.S. State Department's Special Envoy to Combat Anti-Semitism, Mr. Carr served as a Deputy District Attorney for Los Angeles County. He is also an officer in the United States Army Reserves and has received multiple awards and commendations for his nearly 2 decades of military service. As a son himself of Iraqi Jewish refugees who fled persecution, Special Envoy Carr speaks Hebrew and the Iraqi dialect of Arabic. In 2003, these certainly came in handy in use when he was deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, where he led an anti-terrorism team. While deployed, he met with remnants of the Jewish community there and even led Jewish services in the former presidential palace of Saddam Hussein. Today, as Special Envoy, he advises the Secretary of State and is responsible for directing U.S. policy and projects aimed at countering anti-Semitism throughout the world. Please join me in welcoming Special Envoy Elan Carr.
Thank you so much. I didn't ask Saddam's permission to do that in the palace, by the way. Ambassador and Mrs. Danon, And let me take a moment to thank you especially for your inspiring work. We're not only great friends, but we're travel partners. We've been in the many parts of the world together, and I've been witness firsthand to your remarkable, tireless work, and it's an inspiration to me. And I think not only the state of Israel, but the world owes you a debt of gratitude. Yes. Excellencies, Mrs. Iraq Sarah Idan, JIMENA and Nathaniel Malka, my dear friend and my fellow Iraqi Jew, to our great co-sponsors here, especially the Conference of Presidents, of which I was so proud to be a member. I want to thank you for bringing together this remarkable event at so urgent a time. Nathaniel started his remarks by saying, Shalom Aleichem. And in Iraq, the Jewish community would say those words in Arabic, Assalamu alaikum. And that is the community of which my family emerged. 2,500 years of Jewish life in Babylon and then Iraq, under the Babylonians and their successors, and finally under the Muslim Empire and under the Iraq of the first part of the 20th century. On one day in 1948, my mother remembers there was a knock at the door. It was early in the morning. In fact, her father, my grandfather, still had shaving cream on his face. And it was Iraqi soldiers. They said, Mr. Somekh? He said, yes. They said, you're coming with us. They arrested him. They took him out of his home. He, along with other Jews who were rounded up and arrested, were paraded through the streets in leg irons. My mother remembers a touching moment when the other prisoners were crying because there were jeering crowds. And they were watching their families, their wives, their children crying, sobbing at the fate of their loved ones. And my mother still remembers as a young girl, my grandfather, with a stoic expression, told them, don't cry, be strong. You have to be strong for your families. He then was imprisoned. But before he was imprisoned, he was subjected to a Stalinist show trial that served only to confirm the sentence long since decided. His charge was being a Zionist. But what does that mean? He had no connection to the new state of Israel that had just been declared. But what it meant is that he was accused of being at a rally in Baghdad where he handed out Zionist material, Zionist leaflets. Well, there was only one problem, to put aside the question of whether handing out leaflets should be illegal anywhere in the world. The other problem was he wasn't there. So when his case was called, he said, Your Honor, naively, there must be some mistake. That day of this supposed rally, I was in Basra. I was working with British officers in the port of Basra. In fact, I'll bring witnesses to prove that I was in Basra that day. The judge said, are you challenging the accusation against you? For you, 2 extra years in prison. And there he went. And my mother, as a young girl, had to do what no young girl should do, visit her father in prison. Until after several years, in 1951, he said, leave, flee the country, don't wait for me, escape. And so my mother, as a young girl, her brother, my uncle, who was a toddler at the time, and my grandmother, without my grandfather, fled under cover of darkness to Iran, a very different Iran from today, where the Shah of Iran was helping Jews escape and giving Jews asylum in Iran. My family fled across the border to Iran, and from Iran made Aliyah to Israel. I want you to know my family's experience is not atypical for the Jews of Iraq and frankly for the Jews throughout the Middle East. It's a story of forced expulsion, of imprisonment, of divestiture of assets, and most tragically, in many cases, of murder. But I am not here to represent a movement of bitterness against the treatment of the Jews in the Arab world. Far from it. Like most Jews of the Middle East, there is a widespread acknowledgement that this is not the complete story, that there is another Middle East and another story that also has to be told. And that is the story of a flourishing, thriving, healthy Jewish community that lived not for years, but for millennia under Muslim rule. The story of Iraqi Jews, of Babylonian Jews, is a story of learning, of industry, and of excellence. The body of Jewish law that governs Jewish practice on their earth is the Babylonian Talmud, written there in that place. The first yeshivot, the first centers of Jewish learning in the world, were created under Muslim rule. Surah, Pumbedita, Nahardea. The kings of Judah, the lineage of King David himself, existed and were coronated in exile in Babylon, later under Muslim rule. And not just Iraq is an example of thriving Jewish life. We can see this throughout the Middle East. Maimonides, the greatest of Jewish scholars, lived and wrote in Egypt. This is the story of the other Middle East. And it bears mention, it bears careful mention, that the anti-Semitism and the expulsions and the suffering wasn't because the declaration of the State of Israel. That's often an excuse. Let me give you examples. Well before the State of Israel was declared, in Iraq, you mentioned it, Nathaniel, was the Farhud, a Nazi coup that led to horrific anti-Semitism and persecution, led by Hitler's agent in the Middle East, Hajj Amin al-Husseini. And of course, the Damascus blood libel was well before that. And so this is a tale of two Middle Easts. One, a Middle East and an Arab world of tolerance, of openness, of reverence for Nas al-Kitab, the people of the book. And also a Middle East that was alive with science and art and literature. A Middle East that reintroduced the works of Aristotle into Europe by returning crusaders. That Middle East, when Europe was in the Dark Ages. And so my only question today for all of us here, and for audiences well beyond this room, is which of these two paths will the Arab world and the Muslim world take today? What future will it chart? What legacy does it want to have told? My friends, this is a moment of great cataclysmic change in the Middle East. There are new forces afoot. And with moments of change, there is unprecedented potential. This is the time to seize that potential. When we see new rapprochement with the State of Israel in some cases, where we see Arabs coming together in conferences that just happened, for example, a few days ago, where it was declared publicly, enough with anti-Semitism, enough with BDS. Let's chart a future together, all peoples of the Middle East. A future of tolerance and appreciation and mutual respect. It's a time when you have great leaders throughout the Middle East, like the King of Bahrain and the King of Morocco, who are standing up and saying, let's chart a future of tolerance together. Now is the time for us to take these opportunities and not, God forbid, let them disintegrate. But in order to do that, and I will leave you with this, in order to do that, it must be understood, and it has to be stated, that in order to fight anti-Semitism, whether it's in the Arab world or in Europe or anywhere else, it has to be acknowledged that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I want to thank the French Parliament, the National Assembly, for voting by a two-thirds margin, that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And the reason why this has to be understood is that Zionism is not a political movement that began in 1948. Zionism is not something that arose out of the first Zionist Congress in the late 1800s. You want to hear about Zionism? Let's talk about those Babylonian exiles that Nathaniel mentioned 2,500 years ago, the beginning of Jews in what is today the Arab world. The Babylonian captives of Nebuchadnezzar, who wept on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates and said, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand wither. That is what Zionism is. It is as old as Judaism, and it is an inseparable part of the Jewish people as an ethnic national identity, and it is a core religious tenet of the Jewish faith. And so it is no answer to the problems of today to say, we don't have a problem with Jews, we just hate the Jewish state. Doesn't work that way. We want to get serious about this ancient, relentless human sickness that is anti-Semitism. This human pathology that leaves nothing but a trail of wreckage and devastation, not only for Jews, but for every society that embraces it. We have to confront it in all its forms. Jew hatred is Jew hatred. Whether it's focused on the Jew down the street, or the Jewish community in the diaspora, or the Jewish state. And so, my friends, at this wonderful occasion, where we remember the thriving, rich, deep, and productive Jewish community of the Arab world, let us resolve that we will make a future of friendship, that the peoples of the Middle East will once again join hands and chart a future of tolerance and of friendship and of openness and of growth and of health and of progress. And if we do that, we will truly build that better world that our children and that our grandchildren so desperately deserve. Thank you so very much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Special Envoy Carr. One quick note about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, the conflation we saw actually just about a week ago. University of Toronto, student groups protested efforts to put kosher food in the university. Why? Because it has to do with Israel, I suppose. Whereas in the conflation there is very obvious, and thankfully I believe today they've relented starting to put kosher food there, but the immediate reaction was to comment about Israel when Jews try to put kosher food at a university. Our next speaker, our final speaker for this afternoon is Ms. Sarah Idan. Ms. Idan is an Iraqi-American activist, model, television host, and musician. After teaching herself English, she worked as a linguist for the US Army. The job helped bridge the gap between the US government and Iraqis and gained her experience in interacting with people from very diverse backgrounds. Ms. Idan represented Iraq at the Miss Universe pageant in 2017, where, and this is probably where you've heard her story first, after posing for a photo with Miss Israel, her family was forced to flee her country. She has since founded Humanity Forward, an organization that's committed to building bridges between Muslims and Jews in order to promote reconciliation, tolerance, mutual understanding, and peace. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Sarah Idan.
I would like to thank JIMENA and Permanent Mission of Israel to the United Nations for inviting me to be part of a special and vitally important day to honor exiled Jewish communities from North Africa and the Middle East. Commemorating the histories of Middle East and North African Jewish refugees who were expelled from their countries is vitally important in a story I relate to personally. Some of you may have heard of me back in 2017 when I represented my country, Iraq, at the Miss Universe competition. During the competition, Miss Israel and myself posted a selfie on social media with a caption, "Peace and love from Miss Iraq and Miss Israel." This created a firestorm in the media, in the mainstream media, and ultimately led to my citizenship being revoked. From that moment, I received negative responses for posting a photo with my Jewish friend. With my Jewish friend, Miss Israel, I decided to become an activist to bear witness to the plague of anti-Semitism and its effect not only on Jews, but on non-Jews as well. In 2018, I traveled to Israel to learn more about this tiny country that so many Arab countries sees as an enemy and a threat. And I was very surprised and especially touched by the experiences of visiting the Babylonian Heritage Museum in Or Yehuda, which serves as a center to honor the heritage and history of Iraqi Jews. I was born in Baghdad, Iraq, so I felt very connected to the activists I met at the Babylonian Heritage Center, and especially to the Iraqi Jews I met in Jerusalem, who welcomed me with an open arm and with so much love, even though my country treated them so unfairly. I was overwhelmed when I saw pictures of Iraqi government stamps on their passports saying one-way exit, not allowed to return. I started crying, and the Iraqi Jews I met wondered why. I told them I was utterly ashamed, not because of dirty politics, which led to the expulsion of ethnic cleansing of 135,000 Jews from Iraq, but by my own people who watched this happen and didn't have the courage nor sympathy to stand with the Jewish community. Little did I know then that my fate soon would be just as those Iraqi Jews. This past summer, I shared my story and I spoke about anti-Semitism in Arab countries at the United Nations in Geneva, only to have members of the Iraqi parliament call me a traitor and vote to revoke my citizenship. I was angered, sad, and confused by losing my citizenship simply because I shared a historical fact. It is unjust that my Iraqi citizenship was revoked for calling out anti-Semitism, while leaders of terrorist groups such as ISIS still kept theirs. Back to my childhood. As an Iraqi, I learned so much from my parents and grandparents who told me how the Jews played a pivotal role in the development of our country. From making beautiful jewelry to creating Iraqi music and art, to bringing the best fabric of abayas, to contributing to science and the development of the Iraqi economy, the examples are endless. But most importantly, what I have always heard from my family was that they had such good hearts and were extremely educated, respected, and loved. Sadly, 3,000-year chapter of Jewish life in Iraq, along with the larger Middle East and North Africa, came to an abrupt and traumatic end. And much of this is the result of anti-Semitism. For centuries, my country, Iraq, was known as the cradle of civilization. It used to be a home for many different religious beliefs. It used to be the epitome of religious and ethnic diversity, but it's no longer. Everything happened in Iraq today, from killing and destruction to lack of access to basic human rights, is the responsibility of the Iraqi people. Sadly, many Iraqis have historically allowed our government to tread on the rights of minority groups without voicing any dissent. And oftentimes, many participated in destructive campaigns to harm minority groups. We've allowed our leaders to abuse their power, and it's only a matter of time before it's our turn to be tread on. And since the presence and influence of the Iranian regime in Iraq has grown, our government has been pushing Iraqis to embrace the Islamic Republic's ideology. It seems many Iraqis have forgotten the fact that Iraq was not founded as a Muslim country. We were once the cradle of civilization, home to so many religious minority groups that we've sadly pushed to exile. Today, I feel there's a ray of hope when I see Iraqi youth fighting their oppressors and demanding the Iraqi government to stop breaking their wave of progress in the name of religion. These times are crucial for us to raise our voices to history and truth, to speak up on social media and join together to fight anti-Semitism in all forms of bigotry. I am happy to be part of this effort to elevate the histories and experiences of Iraqi Jews and all oppressed religious minorities from the Middle East. And it is only by recognizing and facing the historical injustice endured by the 1 million Jewish refugees from North Africa and the Middle East that we can move forward to a better place of humility and healing. I hope you will step forward with me in my cause, my organization, Humanity Forward, to bring shalom and salam in the Middle East and eventually our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Idan. That concludes our program this afternoon. I want to take a quick note to thank everyone for attending, and certainly our colleagues here from other missions that we might have been remiss to mention, from France, Kenya, Mexico, and the European Union, certainly friends and allies, all of them. So thank you for coming again. Remember, you witnessed a few stories here, pass them along, share them. Keep in touch and follow up on these initiatives and this resolution we're going to be proposing for the General Assembly, and get home safely. Thank you.